Hi there everyone, hope you're doing well today. This video is a bit more of a free-form one, and it's on a theme I've covered quite a lot on this channel from different angles, but really getting to the heart of the issue. It is to do with this balance between masculine and feminine energy. You'll always find these at the core of traditions. I've spoken about that before, the yin and yang, Rama and Sita, Adam and Eve, and so on. And the reason for this is, of course, because it acts as a guide, both for men and women, but also for our culture, our society at large. It orders our families and allows us to build stable societies. And I thought I'd just have a quick look into the experiment in the post-tradition West to see if it's really created the equality and freedom it promised. And I suppose you could say, through the lens of capitalist modernity, how we achieve that equality between men and women. Whether it's desirable or not is probably another matter, but have we achieved it? Well, arguably through that lens you could say yes, young women, it's being reported now, out-earn many young men. Now there might be a problem therein in that women who out-earn men don't tend to look up to such men, but that's a video for another time. Remember, I'm just an evil, toxic bigot, so ignore me. And then there's the other issue about is it more noble to seek your own wants and needs and achievements in the world and serve a corporation over serving a family or your society? But again, I suppose I'm an evil, toxic bigot for even raising that. And then we have the issue of freedom. Are women more free than in the past? And again, in one sense, you could say yes. There's a choice of products, there's a choice of free expression in this day and age there wasn't before. Which tends to lead to women voting for more leftist liberalism. And famously, you can have infinite sexual partners in this day and age. But does that create freedom? That's an interesting debate of our age, and one, again, that you're not really allowed to have. Lily Phillips, the woman who slept with 100 men in a day, is an interesting example here. Now, as I said at the time, obviously she's not typical of a modern woman. This is extremely bizarre and disgusting what she's doing. But at the same time, we have to remember that she's pushing that boundary even further, so the behaviour of the average woman seems even less extreme, even though it is. I mean, it's not unheard of for some women in London or New York or Sydney in Australia or whatever to have 20 partners in a year, if they're 21 years old. A lot of us are sheltered from this, but it's true. It's true. You wouldn't struggle to find young women like that in this day and age. And it begs the question, where does this behaviour come from? Why are young women behaving in this way? Is that freedom? Just having sex with all these men that you don't even remember? I'd argue it's probably not, and it leads to lots of trouble down the line, individually and socially. But it was really interesting after the Lily Phillips fiasco that Julie Bindel came out with the typical feminist line that this was the result of patriarchy. The men are abusing poor Lily Phillips, and that's why, the women are sleeping with all these men who are just using them. It's all the men's fault. But of course, that's not patriarchy, really, at all. We have a very bad understanding if we think that that's patriarchy. And Bindel would be right in saying, of course, that some men are degenerate scumbags. But again, I wouldn't say that that's the result of patriarchy. After all, when we had a conservative society, how many people were behaving in this way? That sort of behaviour would be heavily frowned upon. Today it's in the news cycle and it's gone. The only thing we can say is that the behaviour of young men and women and their promiscuity, as well as the behaviour of people like Lily Phillips, is the result of capitalist modernism with its attendant liberalism. We are now living in the post-feminist, quote, sex-positive world. I had a friend of mine who used to be a feminist leftist, and he said to me something really interesting in that, 5-10 years ago, he would have said, go Lily Phillips, you go girl, you're expressing yourself, take apart the patriarchy. Of course, he said, like most men who get trapped in that ideology, that he was very unwell at the time himself. But of course, we don't have any avenues to understand what health is in this day and age, again, because the masculine-feminine dynamic's been broken down. The masculine is always seen as toxic, so you must go completely against it into chaos. And we view that as somehow virtuous. Of course, it's not. What we really need is balance. Now, I know this is an odd jump to make, but we have this on the one side with the promiscuity of the women, but on the flip side, we have the Tates of the world. Now, I'm always picking on the Tates. I feel a bit bad, but they're just a good example because everyone knows who they are and broadly what they represent. Worldly materialism, getting all the girls, being the king, loads of money. I'm an alpha male. F you, basically. And again, they would present themselves as the opposite of sort of a Lily Phillips type character, but in a way they're of the same ilk in many ways, because they're both promising a lower worldly pleasure, you could say. Lily Phillips is offering sex to men, or men can watch that sex on her OnlyFans. And no man, if you took away his sexual compulsion, would want to engage in that sort of behaviour. It's obviously disgusting. But they're trapped in a lower self that we all have, by the way, but some of us are ideally on a spiritual or at least personal path of growth, which is keeping us from falling into that hell. Because it never seems like hell when you're there. It seems like fun when you're there. But stay there for a year or two and see what happens. And then again, of course, the Tate thing is very much the promotion of, material wealth, being the king. And at the end of that is the promise of sex as well. That's what both of them speak about a lot of the time. If you had my money, you'd have all the girls too, bro. Yeah. And again, we have to give the devil his due here and say, yeah, lots of men, if they had the money, would go and bang all the women. They do what the Tates do. And it's hard not to. We have to be honest about that. Any man knows it's hard to say no if you have an opportunity with a beautiful woman. It's one of the great spiritual challenges of life if you can overcome that and be loyal. That's why it's honourable to be loyal. But the point I'm making here is, again, it plays to this lower nature of modernity. And of course, there's a lot of money to be made in there as well. And a lot of the young guys follow Tate because they want to be Tate. In fact, I knew a guy, as I said on the Substack recently, I used to do many men's groups in London, and there was a guy there who was a real softy lefty type. And I got to know him quite well. And I said, look, why are you so upset with the world? And one of the reasons when we really broke it down was, he's not successful, he's not popular with the women, and he wants to be. So I said to him, look, you want to be Andrew Tate, really? And you're upset about it. I remember his face, because he was like really anti-Tate, But the reality, he did want to be Tate. And he had to find in himself something bigger than Tate. Or first of all, admit that he had the lower nature that wanted to be Tate, and then he'd stop being bitter. But secondly, to overcome that as well, or at least be on a path of overcoming it, because again, we're not perfect, we're not saints. But the point I'm making here ultimately is that, the Tate world isn't patriarchy. It's kind of a red-pilled, renegade, edgy older brother world. And the feminists will say it's patriarchy in order to paint patriarchy in a bad light, but it is not patriarchy. It's not honourable. So if we put all this together, what we're left with is this society where we have mass whoredom and men who are lost in their lower nature. And that isn't the result of patriarchy. Very often feminists are eager to express patriarchy as the unrestrained male sexual drive. And again, to give the devil his due, they have a point in there. The male sexual drive has to be moderated. If it's not, again, it can create lots of chaos. Very unpolitically correct to say, but that's what's happened in the gay world. It's happening in the straight world now because we're copying the gay world. But gays, basically, it's two male sex drives, and there's nothing to stop them. So they will just basically message each other on whatever app and just screw each other. And I've spoken to gay guys. It's unbelievable, some of the stuff. I thought I was aware to how dark things have gotten out there. Wow. They have this thing called chemsex where they do crystal meth and bang each other in big orgies all weekend and then go to work. I mean, it's just madness. But that's what happens when you have the unrestrained male sexual drive meeting the unrestrained male sexual drive. Of course, that's where all the diseases come from as well. But now this is happening in the straight world. The barriers to sex for men are being taken down and promoted as well. It's promoted to women to take down their sexual standards. And see, I'm just a free woman, if I want sex, I'm just going to go and bang a dude, But of course, what that does is it really means the men get lost in the lower self. They don't evolve anymore, and the women devalue themselves. Now, in an ideal world, what we would have, obviously I'm going to believe this as someone who is a deeply spiritual person, religious person, is that sense of universal value that all human beings have, and in a way, we often misunderstand this in this day and age. Oh, it's weak. If you think everyone's got universal value, you're going to be a softy and pathetic and just allow everything to happen. That's not it at all. but we have to see everybody has value in them somewhere, that they don't deserve to be abused. However, that's a big ask for most people, especially in this day and age, a material day and age. Most people are not going to see universal spiritual value. It's only going to be for those inclined on the mystic path that will find God is in every single one of us, in everything. And when we touch that love, you can't help but start to love all people in a way. It's why I've said many times, a lot of the language on the shadow side of the right just isn't for me. I've got no problem with edgy conversations, controversial conversations, but when people genuinely hate the other person, I think, this is just going to lead to hell, whether it's left, right, or centre. It's also why Christ sat with the prostitutes famously. It was this to show that despite our worldly status, we still have God's love inside of us deep down somewhere. Of course, that can save even the worst of us. The world will always judge you, but the spiritual reality within is far more profound than the world. Now, we might have even noticed in this day and age, we can't even talk about prostitutes seriously. They're called sex workers now. And this is another important thing about the modern world, because what it's trying to do is remove the stigma of the old in a way that Christ would. But in fact, what it does is actually damage the whole, because by calling prostitution, which is a degradation of a woman, a sex worker, it tries to normalize that work. But it also ties together the idea of sex, which is supposed to be a beautiful, soulful thing, with work, which is a mechanical thing. And again, that is the Tolkien-style metaphor for what we've seen in the Western world, is the beauty of the Shire being taken over by the cold practicality of Mordor. The idea that sex work is somehow noble and moral now. It's just another form of work. But of course it's not. It's completely devaluing the union between man and woman. But as I say, it's going to be very hard, a hard sell in the modern world for people to buy into this, for true universal love and value. So what we had historically in order to bridge that gap, because it's always been a problem, which is an even bigger one now, is the role of honour. And that came with men being present in their daughters', their sisters' lives. Of course, you can see what's going on here. If you see a woman that you're attracted to and there's a man behind her who's capable, respect-worthy, you're going to respect that woman more, i.e. it's the man in a patriarchal system that promotes the virtue and honour of the woman. Could be his daughter, his sister or so on, or even his wife. Because if you respect that guy and you respect the social standard, you're not going to try and play games with his wife. And again, the wife, to be blunt, women are more prone to social consensus. If the social consensus is that cheating is very bad, that sleeping around is bad, you'll see that they won't largely do it. But now, what we have is a world where we've privatized the sexual experience. It's all sex workers now. And what happens therein is we engage with sex without even recognizing the dimension of the female. That could be a hookup, could be a model that you're looking at in a magazine, could be the porn star, the hooker, whatever it is. We're not thinking that this person has a soul, that they had a mother and father, or maybe lack a mother and father. We don't think on that level because we're in the lower self. That doesn't mean sex is bad, of course. It just means that sex, when it's decoupled with the soul, tends to lead to trouble. It's why, I think it was Pope John Paul II had a lovely quote about the problem with, I think it was pornography he was talking about. The problem with porn isn't that it shows too much of a woman, it's that it doesn't show enough. And that's beautiful. That's exactly it. We're not seeing the whole of the person, and that degrades all of us when we engage in that. Again, I'm not trying to be a saint. I know we're men, and even the women, can have lustful feelings towards the men and that. I know it's not easy. And we're not supposed to be perfect, but we are supposed to be honest. But the point I'm getting at here is this is why, historically, we needed a boundary. We needed men in order to maintain the sanctity of the woman. And if you destroy the patriarchy, you destroy the sanctity. And with that, you destroy the individual, because the lower nature will take over. And then the individual gets lost in his own, sexual lust. That impacts the family down the line. Families break apart. They're not even formed in the first place. And that harms society because it's no longer stable. And of course, when I'm saying patriarchy, we have to remember as well, I'm not talking about tyranny. The way we think about it in this day and age is patriarchy equals abuse and just ordering people around. And yeah, that would be a legitimate criticism for the dark side of the masculine. But there is a loving authority, the wise father. And of course, when I say love, again, I have to point this out, I don't mean Hollywood love of like, your eyes are on fire. That's not what I'm talking about. This is just a massive con that's come from modernity. Love is really selflessness. But in the masculine expression of love, it will be something like strength, order, balance, honour, And of course, to an extent, empathy, willingness to help others. But very often the masculine role is the more implementation of the boundary, tough love, We need the father to say no. Sometimes women need men to say no. And that acts as a safety, again, around the family, around the society, around the civilization. Now, we are not in that era right now. It's quite clear that we are in a state of degradation. But as I often speak to, a time will come where we'll realise these things are vitally important, where we start to understand we totally disturbed the yin and yang nature that was once at the roots of our society. Of course, I don't literally mean yin and yang is Chinese, but what I mean is the balance between masculinity and femininity. I think the one thing we can do as men now, as we reawaken to these truths, is learn from the mistakes our fathers made. We think about the Victorian times, and in some senses, we had more of a structured society, but it probably was too tyrannical back then. Maybe men did start to move into their ego a bit too much. And this again is why I think the spiritual rebirth is so important. Because a lot of the structures we have are right. The idea about we don't want men and women sleeping with each other all the time because it degrades everyone. What you want is the woman who has sexual standards, so it evolves the man. He improves himself to become mate-worthy. And then he has his second initiation before marriage, which is meeting the elder masculine. That's the father of his wife-to-be, and he must be approved by him. So you think about what does that do to the man? It evolves him. It makes him much better, much stronger, much more valuable to the society. And we all have our role to play. But at the same time, this is the real spiritual balance. It's not about lording it over people, throttling people with your control because you're power mad. Again, that would be going back into the sort of Andrew Tate energy. It's about ruling with love. That's why the church was once the centre. And when I say the church, again, unfortunately, that's not going to be the church at the end of your road. That church has been corrupted, most likely speaking. There are one or two out there that aren't, but most of them have been by liberalism. But it's what it represented was love is the real order. And that comes with a sense of responsibility and being strong for the men. But broadly speaking, this is how, in my view, the patriarchy held things together and a case for it. It's not about control and domination. It's about order, love, and stability for the broader tradition. These are my thoughts as always. Do let me know what you think down below. If you're interested in spiritual transformation, do check out my new channel, Tradition and Transformation. That's linked below. Also, there's the Substack. You can connect with me exclusively on there and get exclusive content. And other than that, please do subscribe to this channel as well. It's really nice to get your thoughts and keep the whole thing moving. Have a great rest of the day. Take care.